One of the great joys of lure fishing is the opportunity to travel to far-off places and experience wilderness destinations and tangle with fish that we couldn't normally tangle with. But in many ways, it's the fishing in our backyards, the everyday fishing that shapes us as anglers because, unfortunately for most of us, we can't just head off to exotic destinations and target exotic species every time we want to go for a fish. But if we take advantage of those opportunities that are closer to home, it enables us to take care of our mental health, first of all, but also to hone and maintain our fishing skills. And I think as human beings, we often have a tendency to look longingly at those distant destinations and those distant opportunities and overlook some of the stuff that's closer to home, or maybe even not be aware of some of the stuff that's closer to home. And in my estimation, that's exactly what today's episode of the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast is about, especially for Melbourneites. And I know we have lots of Melbourne listeners to the show. And you guys really should avail yourselves of this opportunity to fish for wild trout, quality wild trout in river and creek systems in the Dandenong Ranges, just 35 kilometres to the east of the Melbourne CBD. So Melbourne listeners, here's the challenge. If you've been looking for that opportunity to get away, maybe just for a few hours and just blow out some cobwebs, wet a line, catch some fish or hopefully catch some fish, and at the same time manage your stress levels, head off to the Dandenong Ranges. We're going to go there in this episode of the podcast with a local who's been fishing that part of the world for over a decade and share some tips with you about how you can get onto some quality brown and rainbow trout within a stone's throw of the Melbourne CBD. Let's get into it.
This is the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast, where our mission is to help everyday sports fishers experience extraordinary lure fishing. If next level fishing is your dream, then let us provide the tools and information that will bring that dream to life. Tune in as our expert hosts chat with Australia's best anglers and share their tips for success. Then check out our website. It's one of Australia's largest and most popular online fishing resources. But right now, settle in to listen as ALF founder Greg Doc Lures Vinyl delivers today's episode through the nerdy lens of a scientist, lure maker, and sport fishing tragic.
Hello, ALF listeners. Welcome to a new episode of the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast. And folks, we are fishing in Victoria today, and we're fishing with a young fellow by the name of Julian Congues Straub, who has been fishing down in that part of the world for a long time. And I say a long time. He's only a young man, 17 years old, but he's been fishing for trout in some of the streams in the Dandenong area for well over a decade. Does a bit of part-time work in a tackle shop, lives and breathes fishing, and certainly knows his stuff. So looking forward to mining the wealth of knowledge in his brain about how to go and catch trout in some of these small streams. So with no further ado, Julian, welcome to the show, mate. Great to have you on board.
Thanks for having me, Greg. It's awesome to be here.
My absolute pleasure, my friend. Hey, let's spend a little bit of time just introducing you to our audience because there's a good chance that a lot of our audience might not know you, or if they might have found you on Instagram or on YouTube because I know you do a bit of stuff on both of those platforms. But just in case they haven't, mate, let's introduce you to our audience. So tell us a little bit about the types of fishing that you like to do, mate. Other than trout, what do you like to do fishing around the Melbourne area?
I love my estuary perch fishing. I've been really getting into that lately. Yep. Recently bought a pedal kayak, so that's opened up a whole bunch more opportunities for me to go and do that in a lot of systems where it's imperative that you have a kayak, a good kayak.
Yep.
Love my trout, love not lure fishing, but land-based shark fishing. I've been doing a bit of that, mostly over the summer months down here. That's good fun, but I'll pretty much fish for anything that swims, to be honest.
Yep.
But certainly trout, something that I've been fishing for the longest time, and it's something that's close to my house. The nearest trout stream to me is in a straight line about 250 metres, and it's a 5-minute drive.
Yep.
So I'm right down the road. I can nip down on my bike or just get my parents to drop me off, and I have my licence in a year, and that's great. I can just go fish down there wherever I want, pretty much.
Awesome stuff. Excellent. Now, mate, where do you dream of going fishing? Is there a bucket list destination that you'd really like to spend a week or two wetting a line?
There's a lot, and being such a young bloke, I haven't got to go to so many places.
It's all in front of you.
Yes, but I think definitely something that I want to do on the top of my bucket list eventually is get up to Jervis Bay and fish off some of the rock ledges up there for land-based game fish.
Yes.
Hopefully, maybe one day a mullen, kingfish, stuff like that.
Sure.
It's I've done a little bit of it, haven't been that successful, but it's such an awesome type of fishing to do, and the rewards are amazing when you get it right.
That's right. And look, anything can turn up there, and sometimes it does.
It certainly does.
It's one of those rare places on the planet where you can tangle with some seriously big blue water fish standing on terra firma. So a very cool place. Mate, what's your bucket list species? You've mentioned a few sort of game species there. Are they your prime targets, or is there something else that's at the top of the list that you want to knock off?
Something that I really want to catch is a 10-pound wild brown trout in Victoria. I've caught a few around the 10-pound mark stock fish, mostly rainbows, but I really want to be able to tick off a 10-pound wild brown in Victoria.
Right.
It's such a big fish for Victoria, and it's very tough. Some other states in the snowies, it might be a bit easier in Tassie, but in Victoria, it's definitely a pretty big ask to catch a 10-pound wild brown in most waters. So that's something I definitely want to do.
Yeah, I think a double-digit brown trout in any waters is certainly a trophy fish, and not a lot of places. Yeah, they're around, but there's not a lot of places. What's your personal best brown, mate?
My personal best brown that I've caught would be in the Merri River in Warrnambool.
Yes.
So I know you obviously were fishing in that area quite a lot.
Yes.
Back in the day. But yeah, it was in the Merri, just up from the weir there, and it was, from memory, 60 centimetres and I guess about 5 or 6 pounds. So not that big, but a very respectable fish. And I caught that on the fly. I do quite a bit of fly fishing as my spinning fishing.
Excellent. Yeah. I know that weir. In fact, one of my best trout came from just below that weir. So it fishes pretty well at certain times of the year when the glaxons are running and getting tracked at that fish ladder just at the weir there. It can be just mayhem with the trout. So very good.
Yeah.
All right, mate. Tell us about your favourite fishing gadget or your favourite piece of fishing tech.
I think it'd probably have to be a very good quality head torch.
Okay.
Being land-based, a lot of the time, something that I always carry, even if I'm planning to go out fishing and come back before dark, things can go south very quickly, and not so much in this area, but when you're out kilometres from anywhere, you really want to have a good bright light to get your way home if you need to.
Yep.
So that's probably what I would say is a good bright head torch. I've got a Lenser one here that I think puts up on a boost feature. It does about 3,500 lumens, but normally about 1.5. So it's very bright. And if you ever got lost out somewhere remote, it'd be a great way to attract attention to yourself in the event of an emergency.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. And the other thing with land-based fishing is that you're often heading out before it gets light. And so you need a torch to get to your destination, and then you've got the whole day ahead of you, hopefully. But very good. All right. Tell us about somebody you'd like to spend a day fishing with, mate. And this could be a family member. It could be some sort of fishing celebrity. It might be someone who's got nothing to do with fishing, but somebody you'd like to spend a day out on the river, casting some lures at trout and just having a fun time and a good chat.
I'd probably pick my pop. He's still alive, but he's 92 now, so he's got some mobility issues where he'd struggle to get out and fish for trout in streams and almost any type of fishing. So I'd love to go back 10 or 15 years when he was still very good and very strong and mobile, and be able to go fishing with him, chase some trout and lures, and show him what I've learnt over the last few years.
Awesome, mate. And what's Pop's name, mate? Raymond Congues. Ray, welcome. I hope you're having a bit of a listen into this episode, mate, and I'm sure you are, in fact, and fairly proud of your grandson. But I do have to say, mate, he's only 17. He really should be able to piggyback you. So if you want to get out on the river, I'm sure he'll carry you to where you can wet a line. All right, so let's move on. I want to talk about that PB trout again, mate. And typically one of the things we do in this getting to know you session is we'll talk about your favourite memory of catching a fish. So tell us about that fish. You're obviously not from the Warrnambool area, so you were in Warrnambool for whatever reason, had a bit of a fish above the weir. Tell us the story of that fish.
Yeah, so it was actually a specific fishing trip to Warrnambool. I was there with my mate, Finn Tafe, hopefully he's listening in, and my dad, Frank Straub. So we were there, 3 of us fishing, and it was just in the afternoon. And it was actually, I had 2 fly rods on hand, one with a sort of intermediate sink tip line and the other with a floating line. And I was casting around the floating line and I just left the sink tip in the water. I thought I'll cast it out. I believe I'd actually caught a fish doing the same thing, a smaller one, earlier in the day. But I just cast out my second fly rod and I was fishing an area that's quite deep. So to let the flies get right down to the bottom, and I picked it up and I started just very slowly figure eight retrieving the flies back into myself. And bang, big trout came. He grabbed the flies, it came straight up, rose up, jumped out of the water and got him in the net. And that's pretty much the story of that fish.
Amazing fish, that one. And it's a fishery where there are some pretty big trout. And it's one of those that it's a stocked fishery as well. You can fish it year round, but there's some pretty good trout in that river system for a very small river.
Yeah, definitely some very big fish in there. And I've had some hits and seen some which are substantially larger than the one I caught. So it's definitely a place that I like to visit when I can.
Yeah. Do you remember what fly you were using?
It was a little zonker, a little rabbit zonker that I tied myself. It was actually, I'd used it to catch a good fish in Tullarook Reservoir a little while before, and it had mucked up the fly, so it actually stripped the fly and retied it basically, and I caught that fish on it as well. So
well done. Excellent stuff. And folks, after this short session of conversation, you can already, I'm sure, understand why, despite his young age, Julian is the perfect guy to have on board to talk about fishing some of these small streams in the Dandenong area, because, as you say, it's close to your home. It's a place that you've been able to fish from a very young age. So just give us a little bit of an overview, mate. There's numerous streams in that area, isn't there, that hold decent fish?
Yeah, there's quite a few streams, and I won't talk too much about the names, but I will give you one. The Warrialic Creek is a great place to go, especially when you're starting out. It's a bigger system, so I don't mind sharing the name, and there's lots of areas. You just got to be careful. There are some areas that are off limits to fishing due to being conservation areas and obviously private property.
Yes.
But there's, within 15 to 20 minutes of each other, there's at least 5 or 6 different streams, 2 different catchments, I guess. You've got the catchment that ends up in Dandenong Creek and then into the Patterson River system, and then the catchment which ends up in the Warrialic Creek, which then flows into the Yarra. And so, I'm in the Dandenong Ranges, so not Dandenong itself, which is obviously the suburb, but just a bit higher up in the mountains in the Dandenong Ranges is where I'm situated.
Yep. And look, totally appreciate that we're not going to name the creeks. Anyone can go and find them. Jump on Google Earth, jump on Google Maps, get a topographical map, whatever you want to do. You'll find places to fish. But obviously these are small streams. They are sensitive to fishing pressure, and so we don't want to cause hundreds of anglers to descend on one or two of these systems. So you need to do that bit of research for yourself. But tell us a little bit about the streams in terms of their size, the types of structure, the flow, the depth, summer versus winter, all that kind of stuff. Give us a bit of an elevator view from way up high of what these streams look like and how they fish.
So most of the streams, I would say, are between 1.5 meters to about 3 meters wide. They're very small streams. Most of them you can jump across in one section or another fairly easily, if you're young and nimble like myself anyway. Yep. And so they're very small streams. Flow-wise, they generally, most of them flow fairly clear. There are some which obviously dirty up after some rain, and that can be a fantastic time to chase trout, especially this time of year as they begin their spawning and migrating up. Obviously, some fish, bigger fish, you'll find come out of a larger river downstream, and you'll get surprised with 40 or 45 centimetre fish in water where it probably really shouldn't be in a normal time of year.
Now, I remember, and this is deviating from the conversation a little bit, but I do remember, and I suspect it was in this part of Victoria, talking to Paul Worsteling back in episode, I think it was 208 or something like that, and Paul mentioned that one of his goals as a young fella was to catch a trout that was longer than the stream that he caught it in was wide, right? And so there are some pretty small streams there that hold some reasonable fish.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I remember that episode actually, and it's a fantastic goal to have.
Yeah.
And it's definitely achievable in some of these streams and some of the feeder streams where normally throughout the spring and summer I wouldn't even look at. This time of year I'll throw a lure in, and sometimes you'll be surprised at what you'll catch out of a stream that's only a foot or two wide.
Yep. And that's exactly why I mentioned that, folks. So as I said, have a look at Google Earth, have a look at Google Maps, get a topographical map and start mapping out some places or marking out some places that you can go and check out. and don't overlook those very small, very narrow streams. You might need to fish them a little bit differently. But yeah, at certain times of the year, and as you say, Julian, when there's a bit of flow at that time of year when fish are moving upstream, they're quite likely to be fishing some of those systems. So tell us what you're looking for, mate, when let's imagine you're exploring the Dandenong Ranges. Let me start that again. You're exploring the Dandenong Ranges for new fishing spots you haven't been to before. What are you looking for in terms of, this is going to be a good spot to go and fish for a trout?
Typically, I'll look for at least a few feet wide, maybe a metre wide, some depth. You don't want to be fishing a tiny trickle. You want it to have some depth because most trout, they're not dumb. They're going to stay in areas where they feel safe. You want to have some pools that are about 2 feet of depth, I would say, minimum. You will find them, like I said, in areas that are shallower than that, but generally a couple feet of depth is good. You want plenty of cover for the fish, overhanging vegetation, often streams that are very small, that are right out in the middle of a paddock. Whilst they may have trout, they're often exceptionally hard to catch and target because of how spooky they are.
Yep.
There's a few things there, and I guess just looking to make sure that if you're fishing a really small stream, make sure there's some form of larger water downstream where larger fish can move up into.
Yep, absolutely. Now, there's both browns and rainbows in these systems, is that right?
Yeah, there's both browns and rainbows. So, for example, the system that's right near my house, traditionally it was just browns, but over maybe the last 3 or 4 years, I've started to notice some rainbows move back in. I don't believe they were stocked because all the fish I've caught have very nice, good fins. It doesn't look like stocked fish to me. And so I think what's happened is that stream was affected by fires quite badly maybe 30 years ago or so.
Yep.
And it's taken them that long to work their way up maybe 10 k's downstream from where they're more stronghold in another system that this system joins. They've worked their way back up over time and we started to see some bigger fish. And in fact, last year I caught 2 40-centimetre rainbow trout in the same session, pretty much to the day, actually. I believe it might have been the 22nd or 23rd of April last year that I caught these 2, and they're the biggest rainbows that I've caught in these systems. I've caught some browns that are probably a tad bigger than that, and there are some bigger fish, but generally, about that 40-centimetre mark is as big as they'll get. And these fish were in less than a foot of water, both of them.
Yep. And sight fishing, do you see the fish often, or is it more blind casting?
It's a lot of blind casting because a lot of the best fishing can be when the water's slightly coloured and when it's overcast. But there definitely are opportunities to sight fish for trout. But generally, when those opportunities are about, I'll be fly fishing.
Yep, fair enough.
Yeah, but there definitely are some opportunities to fly filly with small soft plastics.
Okay, cool. Now, mate, you may have already, in a roundabout way, answered this next question, but I guess I'd like to explore the best times, those sort of bite windows when the trout are going to be most active, and start by talking about seasons and water levels, and then talk about time of day. The best time of year tends to be autumn by the sounds?
Yeah, best time of year, definitely the months of autumn, so April, May particularly. March can still be good, but April and May, and obviously normally in Victoria our trout season extends just into winter as well.
Yes.
So the second weekend, so the Queen's birthday weekend, that's subject to change each year as the dates change, the King's birthday weekend now.
Yes.
But yeah, it's subject to change each year, but generally we get a couple of weeks in winter, and any time from mid-February through to the close season is the best time, in my opinion, to fish these waters.
Okay. And in terms of, sorry, you keep going.
No, you go.
In terms of weather patterns and that kind of stuff, is there something that you would say, if you were thinking about, you do lots of different types of fishing, but if you were thinking about going for a fish, is there some kind of trigger that would make you say, it's time to go trout fishing, this is the perfect conditions for that?
Just your classic conditions, overcast, maybe a bit of drizzle around. If it's been low water conditions, which some years the water can be low till that late autumn time, if you've just had a bit of rain, you don't want chocolate milk water, but if you've just had a bit of rain enough to colour up the stream a little bit, that's a fantastic time to go fishing, as it will often trigger those trout to move upstream, and you'll get these trout that are migrating, and they're often very aggressive because they're getting in that spawning mood.
Yep. And it doesn't seem to matter what species. When you're fishing in river systems, anytime there's a little bit of colour in the water without going, as you say, to turning it chocolate milk, there's a bit of tinge of green or a tinge of brown, it always seems to improve the bite. And it doesn't matter whether it's trout or redfin or cod or up here, mangrove jack and barramundi. That little bit of colour gives the fish a bit of cover, allows them to hunt and gets them excited and wanting to feed. So definitely a good time to fish. Anything else we need to know, mate? Time of day is, does it fish best in the mornings, afternoons? Doesn't it really matter if it's an overcast day?
You'll find, generally speaking, afternoons and mornings, you probably will find some more fish, particularly in the afternoons, as trout often are up on the surface looking for bugs in the afternoon when there might be a hatch around.
Yep.
But a lot of these streams are down in the bottom of a valley, so you can have a twilight period that goes from, especially this time of year, it might go from 3 o'clock in the afternoon till sunset. So you can have essentially 3.5 hours of twilight where the fish are feeding quite heavily. But I'll go any time of day. I can fish from 11 o'clock in the morning till 1 in the afternoon, and you will catch fish, especially if it's an overcast day.
Yep. Okay, cool. Anything else we need to know about where to fish, when to fish, or the kind of conditions that best suit the trout?
No, I think that's it, apart from just making sure that you are fishing in an area where there's going to be trout. Obviously, conditions-wise, they will move up into shallow water, but sometimes you'll see people fishing in just exceptionally shallow water in these streams.
Yep.
And most of the time, you're not going to find fish in there unless it's that afternoon. So sometimes you can throw a little surface lure in there in late afternoon. You might get one, but generally only fishing those really shallow areas in the late afternoon, early morning time.
Yep. And I think often they kind of transition through those areas, so they're going to move under cover of darkness or semi-darkness, and then during the day they're going to hole up in slightly deeper water where there's a bit of structure and a bit of cover, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, cool. Mate, in terms of your strategy for fishing these systems, and I want to talk a little bit about access to them as well. You've mentioned that some of them are on private property, but let's start there, actually. Let's talk about what the sort of protocols and laws and that sort of thing are around going and fishing these systems, and how do you get access to them?
For the private property ones, 100% always seek permission. If there's a fence that you're going to cross, then get permission. Maybe you might legally be able to fish. I don't know the exact laws, but some systems it's 10 metres either side, or the riparian zone, or some laws surrounding that. But always go and check with the landowner, just because you want to avoid confrontation if at all possible. So go and talk to them and see that if they say that's their land and they're running cattle on it or running different forms of livestock and they think you're going to impede on that, maybe disturbing the stock or whatever, then respect that. We're not here to be pests. Go find another spot. There's hundreds of kilometres worth of systems through here. So there are some areas in national parks as well. Most of them are open to fishing.
Okay.
You can fish in most of those national park areas, but just do your research.
Check the laws.
And check the laws 100%, and just be careful, because you don't want to give fishermen a bad name.
Absolutely. And you're exactly right. I think you absolutely nailed that. Be respectful of the property owners. It's their livelihood. We're out there just enjoying recreation. So we're going to have to pay respect to those guys, because it's a tough life without us coming along and making it tougher. Mate, in terms of your strategy for targeting the trout, is it, do you wade, do you fish from the bank? I used to fish in Tassie a fair bit, and some of the streams I used to fish, the common strategy was just to wade right up the middle of the creek, firing casts out, fanning them out as you moved upstream. But other places, of course, the water gets a bit deeper, and so you have to get up onto the bank and work your way around the edges of pools and that kind of stuff. Talk to us a little bit about what the strategy is for targeting trout on these systems.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, Greg. Mostly just walking in the middle of the stream. Most of them you will find you can walk straight up the middle and not get in too deep of water.
Yep.
You can wear waders, but if you've got nice, expensive waders, I would advise against it, because you are going to come across some blackberries and other stuff. Generally, what I'll do is I'll wear gumboots. And what I've discovered recently is if you wear, sometimes the problem with gumboots is you invariably go over the top of them at some point during the day, and then you've got wet and cold feet for the rest of the day. So what I've done recently is I've got some relatively loose jeans and put the jeans over the top of the gumboots. And if you ever slip in, you've got a few seconds to pull your foot out before your gumboot totally fills up with water. So generally, generally I'll wear gumboots. They also protect you. We don't have too many snakes up here, but it's always good to be snake smart and not walk around in Crocs and thongs and stuff, which a few of my mates do, and I always look at them and shake my head. We were going for a fishing session once about 4 Ks up into this river system, and my mate rocks up in Crocs, and I'm like, "You're wearing Crocs? What are you doing?" He's, "I'll be right." I'm like, "Okay, not my problem."
It is if you've got to carry him back out, mate, and you're already carrying Ray, so I'm not sure you're going to be able to carry 2 people.
Yeah. It's
all right. No, that's good advice, and I love that idea of putting your jeans over the top of your gumboots just to give you that little bit of time, because you say you are going to step in a deeper pool or slip over occasionally. It's just the nature of the game. And you also reminded me of my arch enemy, the old blackberry. It's been a long time. We don't get them up here in Cairns. It's been a long time since I've tangled with blackberries, and I can't say that I miss it.
No, I don't imagine you would. They're terrible things, apart from when they give you a bit of fruit throughout the summer months.
That is true. And it can be rather nice to sit on the bank and eat a few blackberries while you're having a fish. Very good. Mate, let's take a change of direction here. I'd like to explore the tackle that you use for this style of fishing. So run us through, first of all, we'll get into lures in a minute, but run us through rods, reels, lines and leaders and what you typically take with you.
So I am currently using, it's an older model Daiwa Preso. I got it as a gift from one of my dad's friends, Chris. So thank you, Chris, if you're listening. I really appreciate that. So it's the model is a PSO 662 ULFS. It's a 6'6" ultralight, and it casts 1/32 to 1/4 ounce, and it's a 2 to 6 pound rod.
Yep.
Some people prefer a shorter rod than that. A lot of anglers you'll find they'll use a 5'5" or sometimes even shorter, and that's great if you're going to have a dedicated small stream trout rod. But you'll find if I'm fishing a small stream, then I might want to go fish a slightly larger river, and I don't want to have to take 2 rods with me to go and fish 2 different systems. So that's a great size, in my opinion, that 6'6" range. Okay. I have fished 7 foot or 7 foot plus rods, and I don't struggle personally that much with it. I think just because I'm used to managing the longer rods of fly fishing and stuff, and stuff like that. A Euro nymphing, you can fish a 10-foot rod in a very small system. Yeah. And as you get used to it, it doesn't bother you that much. But definitely 6'6" is a good size. And the reel I'm using is a Daiwa TD Black, and it's a 2000 size with a shallow spool.
Okay.
And braid on that, generally fish a 6-pound braid. You can fish straight for a 6-pound mono. And I have done that, and it can be very good, but I like to use my reels for multiple different species, and you'll struggle to catch your good size estuary perch on 4 pounds straight through mono.
Yep.
So I generally just fish a 6-pound braid. And leader-wise, again, typically these trout aren't very line shy. A lot of them have probably never seen a lure. I would go with just a 6-pound fluorocarbon leader. You can go 4 pound if it gives you a bit more confidence. But generally speaking, 6 pound should be more than adequate for these fish.
Yep. Excellent. And leader to line connection, what are you using for that?
FG, not
FG.
All the way. I have experimented. You can do, another one is a Slim Beauty, and I do that knot. It's a bit quicker. And you can do a Slim Beauty if you're in a quick situation where you've busted off a lure or something on a tree and there's a nice big brown sitting in front of you. You want to get a lure out there quickly before he decides to move on. You tie a Slim Beauty or even a double uni. Often these fish, they're not going to try to bust you off in structure, so you can get away with a double uni if that's all you can tie. Yep,
excellent. Very good. Mate, let's move on and have a chat about lures. And what I'd like you to do is narrow it down to just 3 lures. And if you're headed to the Dandenong Ranges, you're targeting trout in these streams, both brown and rainbow, these are the 3 lures that you'd feel confident that most times when you're out there, you're going to be able to catch fish on them. And then once you've nominated those lures, we're going to go through and ask you how we go about fishing.
All right. This truly is probably the toughest question on the show, isn't it, Greg? But I'm going to have to go with the number 1 lure that I would pick, which is not one that probably most people have heard of. It's called a Dorado stick, and it's 4.5 centimetres. So if you look up Dorado stick 4.5 centimetre, Yeah, you can buy them on eBay. I believe they're a Polish-made lure. I don't even know. I've only got one of them, and if I tie on one lure, this is all I use, and I haven't lost it. And because fishing small streams, you don't lose many lures, as you can normally wait and go get them.
Yep.
But I'm going to be buying a few more because for years and years, I didn't know what it was called. It doesn't have any markings on the body at all until eventually I found a tiny print on the bib. It says Dorado, and then through a bit of digging, I found out what it was.
Okay.
But
how did you come across it in the first place? How did it end up in your tackle box?
I couldn't tell you. I think I must have bought it. Honestly, I've got some lures in my tackle box. I've been fishing for a very long time, and I've got some lures that have been passed down to me from people. So I think it was probably in a tackle store somewhere, and I bought it. I think it was probably in Hookup Bait and Tackle, and I bought it there.
Yep.
But honestly, I couldn't tell you for sure.
That's pretty normal. Hey, so tell us about this lure. So Dorado sticks 4.5 centimeters. It's a hard body?
It's a hard body, yeah. It's a hard body. It's got a fairly decent-sized bib. What you will find in these streams is often, if you're not wading, you'll be up quite high above the bank in a lot of areas. They're quite channeled.
Yep.
So if you fish something like a classic Rapala with quite a small bib, you're not going to get down very deep, and you won't really get down in the fish's face because a lot of it is a reaction bite for these trout. I really believe that. A lot of the time they're just reacting to it. So you really want something that gets down too close to the bottom that they're going to see it. And especially this time of year, if you've got some dirty water and it's fast current, they're not going to see a small lure that's a metre above them in really dirty water. So that's another reason. But yeah.
Okay.
And I guess some alternatives to that lure would be, because you might struggle to get them. So I think an alternative would be EcoGear SX40 in the floating, or Daiwa Pro Double Clutch in the 48 suspend.
Okay.
Those are just a couple of, if you can't get hold of those lures, the Dorado stick, those are a couple of other reasonably deep diving small hard bodies that will get the job done.
Okay. Walk us through how to fish them, mate, in terms of where you're casting them to and how you're working them.
I'll cast them up generally to the head of the pool. In larger rivers, you want to start at the tail of the pool and kind of work and stagger your casts up. If there's multiple fish in the pool and you catch one at the top, you're going to spook every fish throughout the rest of the pool. But if you catch one at the bottom, generally you'll be able to catch a couple more fish out of that pool.
Yeah.
But in these smaller systems, generally I'll just cast straight to the head of the pool because there's often only one or two fish in the pool, and no matter where you hook them in the pool, you're going to spook the fish because they just flap everywhere. So I'll cast to the head of the pool, and mostly I might give it a couple taps of the rod tip to get it down, and then just a slow wind and a few twitches throughout the retrieve, just to, especially if I have one following it, I'll give it a few twitches just to hopefully get an aggressive response for that trout to grab the lure.
And obviously you've got to work that lure a bit faster than the current to give it some action. Imagine that's going to determine what a fast, medium, slow roll is.
Yes, 100%. And another reason why I pick the lures with slightly bigger bibs is generally it takes a slower wind to get them going.
Yes.
You often have to pull a Rapala or something, a classic trout, quite fast to really get it going. But with this lure, it will sit right down and it will sit there, and you can work it really slowly and keep it in the strike zone for a lot longer.
Yep. Awesome. Anything else we need to know, mate? You just fish them out of the pack with standard hooks and all that kind of stuff, or is it, you don't trick them up at all?
I'm not sure. These hooks that I've got on this one here have definitely been replaced. I believe these are just little owners, little owner trebles. But from what I can see on their website, when I've looked them up, the hooks look okay to fish out of the pack. So you're not going to, on smaller trout, generally I don't bother with upgrading my trebles. They're not going to stitch you up too badly most of the time.
They don't generally straighten them, but yeah, you never know.
You never know.
All right, so we've got three hard bodies. So the Dorado sticks, and then you've given us a couple of options there, that the EcoGear SF40 and the double clutch, the Pro Double Clutch. So they're all hard bodies. Did you have other lure styles that you use, mate? You mentioned soft plastics earlier on.
Yeah, so I'd throw in a Strike Tiger 1-inch nymph. You can use different colours, but three colours that will get you through is olive pepper, black and gold, and the orange spawn. They're three colours that will cover you for any scenario in these small streams. I generally fish that on a 1/32 ounce jig head.
Yep.
Down to a 1/16, depending on water conditions. If it's a bit faster, fish a slightly heavier jig head.
Yep.
And
how do you fish that one, mate?
Similar again, I'll often just throw it to the head of the pool.
Yep.
And either slow roll it back, which you can get a few fish on, but generally it's weird. If you fished a bent minnow, you'll understand, but it's like a cast out, and you generally I'll let it sit there for a second like you would have been, and then obviously it's not a floating lure, but work it in a similar way.
Okay.
Just a wind and a tap, a constant tapping of the rod tip.
Yep.
And that just really gives it a little twitching action because they don't have a lot of action, inherent action. You can also just do a sink to the bottom and a hop retrieve.
Yep.
But generally speaking, in your average trout pool that's only a foot or two deep, I'll just cast it out and do that constant twitch retrieve back, all the way back.
Cool. All right. Is there any other lures you want to throw into the mix, mate?
I will throw in a Hurricane Lures Switch 66 bent minnow, which I've recently started targeting these fish on surface. And yeah, it's been probably the best lure so far for that. It's obviously fishing in these smaller streams, a classic bent minnow, often they're 76 or even bigger mill.
Yep.
So just that slightly smaller presentation of the 66 millimeter bent minnow seems to get a lot more hits and strikes from these often smaller trout.
Yep. Okay, cool. So, mate, we've got three basic lure options here. We've got the small hard bodies, we've got the strike tiger soft plastic nymph, and we've got the Hurricane Twitch 66 bent minnow. Talk to us about when you would choose each of these different lures. Do you have particular conditions or situations where you'd say, I need the hard body here, or maybe I need the soft plastic here, or is it just a case of rotating through them and fishing all of them to see what's working on the day?
Generally, when I'm starting out, I will throw on a hard body. It's the most reliable lure. You have generally the best hookup on hard body lures. So sometimes the soft plastics and the bent minnows, and you can definitely struggle to get hookups on these smaller fish because there's often not room to strike or very short strikes from fish. But with two trebles, you generally hook most of the fish. So I'll throw on a hard body. But if I am follows and the fish aren't hitting the hard body or they're just barely tapping it, then I'll switch almost straight away to the Strike Tiger 1-inch nymph.
Okay.
Because when they're being a bit finicky like that, often a soft plastic presentation will give you a lot more hits. And even though you might not hook as many, you will end up landing more fish just because more fish are actually connecting with your lure.
Taking the lure, yep. Okay.
With the bent minnow, if you're out there to catch heaps of fish, it's not something I'd suggest. But if you want a surface strike or obviously and a bit more fun and sometimes it might sort out a bigger fish, then that's when I would choose that lure.
Okay. And any time of day and night with the bents, or do you prefer to fish them in the low light periods?
You can definitely fish them throughout the day, but yeah, the low light periods are probably when I would mostly throw it on, particularly in the evening. The trout are often looking up in the evening, so throw that on. Late afternoon.
Perfect. All right, mate. Anything else we need to know about lures?
No, I think that covers it all.
Got it all nailed. All right. I've got one more question for you before we wrap this up, mate. But before I ask that question, I know that you do a bit of work for one of the local tackle stores, and there might be an opportunity for our listeners to come in and have a chat with you as well. So tell us about who you're working with, mate.
Yeah, so I work part-time at Hook Up Bait and Tackle. I've been working there part-time for a couple of years now. And I've been going there for probably over 10 years since I was only 5 or 6 years old. And it's just a great store. We stock a lot of stuff that your BCFs and anacondas might not stock. A lot of more specific lures that are catered to this area, Melbourne area. And all the boys in there are very knowledgeable. And between one guy in there is going to be able to tell you about what you need to know.
Okay.
So we got myself, Glenn, Billing, Casey, George, who you've had on the podcast before.
Yes.
And Sean.
Yep.
And between us four, Sean does a lot of fly fishing, Glenn, lots of estuary perch, Casey the same. Someone's going to be able to tell you about what you need to know to catch the fish that you want to catch.
Perfect. And tell us how we can find you, mate, both physically and online.
Phone number for Hook Up Bait and Tackle, 9758 4332.
Yep.
Registers during business hours, and the website is hookuptackle.com.au.
Yep.
And we do some online orders, but you can always order over the phone as well.
Sure.
If you can't come into the store. And the address for the store is 718 Burwood Highway, Ferntree Gully.
718. Sorry,
Burwood
718 Burwood Highway, Ferntree Gully. Right. Folks, obviously Julian knows his stuff, as you can hear from this interview, and these guys have got some pretty good gear for this style of fishing in stock. So make sure you go and check it out before you head into the Dandenong Ranges chasing these trout. So, Julian, we're going to wrap this up now, but what I'd like you to do is finish up by telling us some things that we can do on those days when the trout are not playing ball, mate. So we've all had those days. Conditions might look perfect. We might have all the right gear, know exactly where to fish and know what techniques to use because we've listened to this podcast interview. But sometimes the fish don't listen to podcasts and they don't do what we expect them to do. So leave us with some tips, mate. What can we do if the fishing's a bit quiet?
One thing which I would say is if you're struggling to catch fish in these systems, generally you'll get follows or some indication of fish being there. If you're not getting follows and indications of some fish or you're not spooking fish, I would move to another system because it's such a small creek that if they're there, you're going to see some sign of the fish.
Sure.
So maybe there's been some flooding and they've moved, or the water quality is not great. So they've moved or they're not in that area. So the
maybe
first thing I would do
been
is
through
move.
Before you, mate.
Exactly. You can have secondhand water. That doesn't happen all that much up here, but it certainly can happen sometimes. And sometimes I'll be fishing and I'm like, wow, this isn't any good. And then I'll call up one of my mates or I'll be chatting to them later in the day and they're like, oh, yeah, I fished that today. I was like, oh, what time did you fish? And I was like, oh, I came through an hour after you and caught absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Especially when you're walking through the centre of one of these streams, generally it's going to take quite a few hours before the trout are keen to bite again after they've been spooked.
Yeah.
And one other thing would be fish some hard bodies downstream. You've got to be very sneaky when you're doing this, but go up to the top of a nice-looking run or pool and sneak your way off, and the trout are obviously they're facing upstream always, so you've got to be quite stealthy. But stealthy, throw a cast to the back of the pool and just super slowly work that lure back on very slow wind, just seeing the current.
Okay.
And you'll be amazed at the results that can bring sometimes. When they're just not in the mood to really chase, something sitting in the current in their face, just giving a little shimmy like a hard body will very often get them to eat when nothing else will.
Awesome stuff. Hey, Julian, you have done yourself proud, mate. You've given us some great tips and some great advice. You've been through all the tackle, the lures, everything we need to know to go and target some Dandenong Ranges trout. For that, we thank you, mate, and we look forward to having you on the show again sometime in the future.
Thanks, Greg. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Australian Lure Fishing Podcast. For free show notes, downloads, tools and resources, please visit our website on doclures.com or consider supporting the show by joining Team Doc Lures to receive exclusive members-only episodes, tools and resources. But for now, tight lines and may the fish be with you.